Chad, we're on fire, man. Episode 3. And the guests just keep getting better.
It is great to be here from the 90s Worship Night call center on this Monday,
right.
Thursday. What a fun episode we have in store, Ryan. It's going to be.
I am looking forward to this. This is Brenton Brown. He is a legend in so many of our lives, and I've never met him before in like 30 years, and I've met a lot of people. But he looks like he might be as fun as you. He's quite the character, and he's sitting in a unique setting right now, which I got to find out about that. So without further ado, why don't we bring in the Brenton Brown? How about we do that, Chad? Let's do it. Here we go. Do you feel like you're in the 90s now? Huh? Straight from the 90s.
Do I look like I'm from the 90s? Yeah.
You do. Yeah. You look like you're from some century. I'm like either from the 90s or another planet. So I'm just like, those are awesome glasses.
Oh,
thanks, man. I'm going for the dark Back to the Future look. That's just for the 90s Worship Night release. Yeah.
Well, there we go. Well, that's what we've been doing a whole lot of. So absolutely
awesome. Now, Brenton, I thought you were in LA, but I don't think you're in LA. It looks a little bit too sunny for even LA. What you got going there? Where are you?
I'm in rustic Kauai. I'm on an island surrounded by small pigs and chickens, feral chickens, and a rooster. So every now and again you'll hear a rooster, and that's not me clearing my throat. So I love this dude. He takes his job seriously. He's running a little late, but he's still giving it horns. He's a good man.
It's like a classic worship leader, you know? He's a little rustic, running a little late. Is that what you were setting up? We can all identify with that.
Yeah. Am I on yet? Am I on?
Yes, exactly.
I think I'll just start the song.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So that's where I'm at.
Well, Brenton, I was just saying to Chad that there is like a limited, small, select number of people in both of our lives, and in so many of our lives, where you can point to these people whose voice and songs have kind of like shaped our early kind of like launch into this world of worship leading, and you're certainly a voice like that for me. Even the fact that we've never met for 30 years, and somewhere back, it's like 26 years ago, I started Praise Charts, and it was all inspired by songs that I was leading on the guitar, sitting at the piano, many of which you had a part in writing. So I just want to personally say thank you for your inspiration, and it's an honor to be in your presence here talking to you today.
Geez, Ryan, thank you. Thanks for Praise Charts.
Yeah.
If my mom and dad were sitting next to me, they'd be like, you won't believe this guy. He's not the dude you're talking about. I don't know who that guy is.
I know. Yeah. Well, my parents say the same thing about me, so I don't know about you, Chad, but what do you think, Chad? You've certainly got some history listening to Brenton's songs, and I'm sure he was a great inspiration for you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I told Brenton this before, but I think Ryan, you and I were just talking about it. But I first remember it was at the end of the '90s when the "Come Now Is the Time" album came out. Just everyone that I knew in my little circle was it just immediately started leading "Lord Reign in Me," and then "All Who Are Thirsty," and it was just like wildfire. It was spreading, and that's when I first heard the name of Brenton Brown, and that kind of paved the way to all that Brenton contributed to the worship community throughout the 2000s and beyond. So full circle moment for sure with all that we've been doing lately.
Hey, Brenton, can you tell us, like, what was the first moment that you remember in your life where you were like realizing you had a voice that maybe was going to go beyond the 40 or 50 or 100 people that were sitting in front of you in a small church. So was there like a moment or a season, or how did that kind of come about for you? If you could take us back to the early years, what was that first sort of
Well,
breaking?
shoots, I don't know if I ever thought this is. I mean, worship leading wasn't a thing, right? It was
Yeah.
like my grandfather was a missionary, and he was like a Victorian missionary. He was like, he wasn't when he passed away, he still wasn't cool with drums in church. Um, so
Huh.
we were like we were like the kids in the back, just like, can we can we do, is this, are we allowed to do this? Is this cool? Uh, and then, and just fooling around. We never thought this was going to be a thing, or these songs were going to go anywhere. We would just, man, I can play a guitar. That's
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can't play an like a pipe organ. But I still, there's something that happens when we like sing together and worship Jesus with these simple songs. So I never thought, man, these songs are gonna go crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never did. But All Who Are Thirsty was the first one that I wrote. I kind of been listening to. I've told Chad this, but I've been listening to Ron Canoli. That was so. I went from like Assemblies of God, piano and organ worship, to like a new church
Yeah.
that had like a fusion band. This was the early '90s. It was all, Alex Acuna, Abe Laboriel,
Yeah.
Crystal Mario, all the like fusion guys. And I just thought, oh, God loves fusion music. That's what I got saved into. I was like, oh, I don't know God loved fusion music so much, but I guess this is what I'm gonna have to learn. So I started playing my Paul Jackson Jr. guitar licks in the band, and then but while it was happening, the Lord was doing something with me and just kind of touching my
Mm.
heart and grabbing me by the scruff of the neck, and letting me know how much he loved me, and how much he loves us, and which blew my mind. And one morning I've been reading the book, The Divine Romance by Gene Edwards. And it's basically the story of, the metaphor of Christ, the Lord, and his bride, and how God has wooed us and is calling us to be his own. And that when this is all said and done, this crazy world that we live in, we're going to be celebrating a wedding. We're going to be at the feast of the Lamb, and it's going to be amazing.
Yeah.
And I just woke up singing all of it. And there's this passage at the end of the book, in the book of Revelation, where it says, "Even so, come, Lord Jesus. The Spirit and the bride say, come, 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 get your bride,
Mm-hmm.
and let's get the party started." That's the end of the book. And I just woke up with this line, "All who are thirsty, all who are weak." And I remember thinking at the time, that's a 3 chord. That's weird. Because the first chord's a G, and then the next chord's a B minor. And I was like, I've never written a song with a 3 chord. And then I just sang it out, and it was some of those songs like you work really hard at and spend years grafting on, and some of them you kind of like, oh, I can't believe this. I can't believe that this is coming out
Yeah.
my mouth, and this sounds good. And who am I to be able to hear the song and sing the song? And that was one
Yeah.
of them. And yeah,
So
and then
great.
we let it at church, and it went real good, like to everybody's surprise, especially mine. And that was when I thought, hey, wait a minute, maybe the Lord could use me. Maybe I
Yeah.
could be on I'll be on the team, even if I'm on the bench. I just want to be on the field somehow. I'll be the
Yeah.
water boy. That's yeah.
Yes. Chad, as I'm hearing this story from Brenton, I'm thinking this is what is so great about this whole 90s worship night concept is we're tapping into people who weren't pursuing something, like they weren't pursuing greatness. It's almost like they stumbled into it, like the story that Brenton's just telling us. They didn't even know it was a thing. And that's what makes these stories so real, so raw, so authentic. Is it's not like Brenton, you were going, oh, I'm going to be, a worship, artist. And that's the temptation that exists in 2025, because It's a thing, so people can pursue it. But you weren't pursuing it, Brenton. You sort of stumbled into it some ways.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I wasn't even sure if I wanted to be in the band.
Yeah.
I was, I was pretty sure I didn't want to be in the band, but somebody was like, "Hey, you play guitar, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, in a metal band. Like, I'm not, I'm not, regulation issue for church band, you know." And they were like, "Well, come on, let's like, just get in there and see what happens." But it wasn't,
Yeah.
it definitely wasn't. It didn't feel cool to me. It was an impossible thing to explain to my buddies. Like if any of my school buddies had come to church and seen a 16-piece band with a horn section and a choir singing Ron Canoli songs, like I don't think there's no box they could put that in. They'd just be like,
No.
I don't know what happened to Brown. Like it's like he's wearing waistcoats now, man. He's wearing vests and a tie. So that's So that was the story. But Jesus was so compelling, and the presence of God was so compelling that He just graced us with His presence, and we sing these songs. Some of them were like 4 lines long, like cutting edge worship back then. Like Lord, you are more precious than silver. That was one of the jams, or like Jehovah Jireh, my provider. I think that was like four lines long.
Jehovah Jireh, my provider.
Bro, it had a backbeat. And man, we sing that, and then like I sometimes look up and people be in tears, and I'd be like, "What is happening?" Like Jesus likes this song, So anyway, that was the world. It's a hard context to explain, especially without the internet. And I was over there in sunny South Africa. We were a long way from anywhere. I was in Cape Town, so there was no. I didn't expect these songs to go anywhere. I just, and it was just like, well, back to church on Sunday. Here we go.
Beautiful. Well, Brenton, I would love to have you share some stories about some of the people you've rubbed shoulders with, who also became like giants, as I might call them, for this whole era of the 90s, and as we sort of grew into leading worship. So a couple of names, which certainly won't be any surprise to you, but could you just talk about your connection with and how you came into alongside, first of all, a guy like Brian Doerksen? I mean, he's a song that you sang on this Break Through the Stars album, Refiner's Fire. Could you just tell us a little bit about your kinship with him and maybe a couple memories or experiences that you have? Let's shed some light on some of these folks that you've come alongside.
I'd love to. I have so many people to thank, and I'm so grateful to so many people who put up with me over the years. My first worship pastor, Glenn Robertson, you wouldn't know of him, but he's the guy. He's the original. Like, okay, let's have this kid in the band. And Brenton, you don't know who Paul Jackson Jr. is, but you're going to have to learn. He was the fusion worship leader who led from congas. So props to Glenn Robertson. But after Glenn, I went to study in England, and while I was there, I found my local church, which is the closest thing to home that I knew, and it was a Vineyard church. I didn't really know much about the Vineyard movement, or I just knew the people in the church, maybe 70 people in the church. And then the worship leader had to leave suddenly, which is basically the story of my life and career. They're like, well, there's nobody else, man. Would you consider doing this? So that's basically that's all my jobs are like that. So so I started leading worship at a Vineyard church, and then I got a letter from this guy, Brian Doerksen. I wasn't even sure how to pronounce his name. Actually, the first time I went to his house, I was downstairs and there was no one around, and the phone was ringing. So I picked up the phone and I went, "Hello, you've reached the Doerksens." And then somebody shouts it down, "Doerksens!"
Doerksen.
So when I went to England, Brian was looking after the worship for the Vineyard Churches movement in the UK, and he'd invited people to write a song or write whatever songs they'd written, and I'd written a couple in South Africa, just send them in. And then he called me up and said, we'd like to use these songs on a record. He'd written a song which he lowballed, which was "Come Now Is the Time," which was like this blazing anthem. He barely mentioned it. All he wanted to do was like elevate and help all the local worship leaders and churches. He's a super servant-hearted, Brian, and very tender. He's a father of 6, and he and his wife Joyce basically just took me in like the waif and stray that I was. And whenever I got a chance, I would leave Oxford and head to London and be embraced by their warm post-Mennonite church family vibe. And it was glorious. It was the best thing ever. So and he was just a solid and still is like a pole star in worship for me. Just somebody. I don't think he's capable of being disingenuous. He is who he is unapologetically, and who he is a very kind and thoughtful and sometimes shy guy. And I just peppered him with questions every minute of the day, because I'm a loud and noisy South African. Yeah,
Chad,
so
tell me about. Oh yeah, I was gonna say, Chad, tell us about like having Brenton sing "Refiner's Fire." How did that come about? That Brenton got that honor.
Yeah, well, as I kind of came up with the idea of, putting out a studio album to, more or less kind of commemorate, just the whole 90s Worship Night docuseries coming together. And I'd already, connected with Brenton. He so graciously provided an interview for our upcoming docuseries, which very excited to get that, ball rolling here soon. But so as we were thinking about the studio album, my wife and I was like, man, I'd love to have Brenton be a part of this in a couple of ways. So we got to feature one of his songs, but I was like, man, it'd be really cool to maybe, have a Brian Doerksen song in there that maybe, Brenton could sing, was my thought. I didn't know if Brenton would go for the idea or not. And I pitched it to him, and he so graciously accepted, and it all came together. And it was just really neat because, I had, as Brenton knows, connected with Brian a few weeks ago, while Brian was in town, and he had just listened to, Brenton's version of Refiner's Fire. And, obviously that song had been on Brian's mind a lot just with the touring he's doing. And he just, kind of did a 35-year anniversary version of it himself. So, he kind of laughed. He's like, this is the year of Refiner's Fire, but really the truth is, I mean, that message is just as fresh today as it was 35 years ago.
Yeah.
So for the fact that we could, honor that song, but then I really love, and just as you were talking with Ryan, is just having, honoring, Brian and his song, but having someone who Brian was a mentor to directly, Brenton, who then went on, obviously, to bless the nations with his worship ministry. I just thought that there's just something cool and very, connective to what we're doing with 90s Worship Night, with celebrating legacies and telling these stories. So I'm really excited about it. And then Brent, what I love to tell, our press release just came out, Brent, I'll have to send it to you. But I was just telling him how your idea to add the dobro on that track just really, that's what sealed the deal for, in my mind, making it a hit. So some musical genius right there, Ryan.
So great. I can remember the first time I heard that song, because I would count it to be like one of those songs that sort of broke open a new world of worship music for me. And first time I heard it was just in a living room, 10 people, an acoustic guitar. Like, that was it. It didn't need some special recording for my ears to perk up and go, what is that song? Like, it just has that kind of special anointing on it. And I feel like it certainly was one of the songs that broke open a new wave of worship in this era of the 90s. So what's your thoughts? What's your first experience with the song, Brenton? Do you remember?
I had a buddy who still is actually closer to God than I was. He's like the come and see guy in my life. Like, come on, Brian, have a look at Jesus. he played me some Vineyard music, and Brian was on there, and I remember him playing me something, and I remember saying to him, because I was in the throes of fusion worship, that'll never work in church. That So I've always had my finger on the pulse. I've always known exactly
Yes.
what's gonna happen next, you know. Um, but yeah, obviously there's something super pure-hearted about that prayer. It's hard to sing that prayer without, you know, acknowledging your need for Jesus and the
Yeah.
kindness of God and in bringing us in. And it really is like it's become a hymn, you know. It's a hymn in the UK and all around the world, and it's so simple to play. No bells
Yeah.
and whistles required, just the prayer and the heart behind it, you know.
Yeah.
Um, I've got a couple of Doerksen stories though that I would love to tell you.
I would love to hear.
Okay, here we go. Here's one.
Let's get
So
let's get let's get close and dirty here. Here we go. So
well, yeah. So here's classic. Brian speaks real slow, and I speak
okay.
like a South African, loud
Yeah.
and fast, basically. And so, he goes. He says, "Hey, man, we're going across to California, and I'd like you to come with me to lead worship." And I was like, "What is this, man?" I didn't know you could travel for ministry. Then people would want you to be there. You know, I still think it's surprising, and
Yeah.
I'm grateful every time it happens. So we go there and we lead worship at this event. There's a lot of people and all the singing, and we walk there. So there you go. You can see Brian tapping into his Mennonite roots. We walk to the venue and we walk back just because of the jet lag and everything. And I remember distinctly, like I'm trailing behind him by about 5 feet. He's a fast walker, and I'm asking him about the way he chooses songs and how he puts them in order. You know, it's like, so you're a worship leader. How do you choose which songs you're going to do first and then second and third? You know, what's like, shouldn't you? And I was like, shouldn't you be starting with like a Thanksgiving and then a praise song, and then you can do something and like another song? Isn't that what the Bible says? And he just keeps walking. I'm like, Brian, like, what's the answer to that question? You know, and then he turns around and he looks at me and he goes, when I think of that stuff, the answer is Jesus. You don't need any songs in order. Jesus has made the way. And then he turned around and walked off again. And I was like, boom, my brain was blown. I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize Jesus really did pay it all. You don't have to put the perfect worship set together to access the throne room of God. He literally says you can
What
come
a
boldly.
concept.
It
I
blew my
feel
mind.
like
I was like, yeah.
how many
Yeah.
worship leaders listening right now are going to be like, oh man, the stress has all just left me. I can do any
Yes.
song. I can start with
100%.
any song.
100%, man. Jesus paid it all. The doors are open. Run
Yeah.
inside, man. Yeah. So that
Thank
was
you
that.
for
And then I
that.
was like, and then I was also like, well, but how did you think it went? Like, how do you think? How did it go? And what do you think? And I'm peppering him again and again. He has to slow down. And in my mind, the way I remember it, kind of look over his shoulder, and he's like, "Oh, I don't do postmortems anymore." He says. So I was like, wow, what?
Oh my goodness.
My brain was blown again. He was like, yeah, I don't do post, because it's like often I'm like the last person to have a good read on what went down at church.
Yeah.
You know, I normally leave it to Joyce, my wife, to tell me how it went, but I don't do them. And if I do them at least 3 or 4 days later, he says.
Yeah.
And then he just carries on walking. And these are words that have saved my life over and over again. So I wanted to share those nuggets of wisdom from Brian Doerksen.
I would definitely confess, almost every time I've led worship, one of the first thoughts that comes when I see my wife was like, how did that go? You know, and I don't really want to say it, don't really want to admit it, but like, yeah. So, wow.
I mean, as Paul Baloche would say, it's great that you care. Like, I love that you care. Fantastic. this is
Yeah.
fantastic that you actually still care about it. But then on
Mm-hmm.
the other hand, there is an element where you just have to leave it in the hands of the
Mm-hmm.
living God. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Good stories. Hey, since you brought up Paul Baloche, I mean, he happens to be another giant in the land that you have written a few great songs with. I feel like Paul feels like a friend to so many. I've had many
Yeah.
great conversations and times with him. But man, you have written some songs that have stayed through. Like even this last Sunday, of course, the Hosanna song is like every time Palm Sunday comes up, it is like the reigning ultimate song for it just has the lyrics, has the rhythm, the guitar. It doesn't have the three chord in it, so I guess that
No.
trick didn't stay with you. So
Yep.
you didn't lean into that one too hard, but I love the three. Just a little point out there. I love that chord very much.
I'll make a note.
Tell me a little bit about Paul Baloche, if you don't mind. And I won't make this go on for I don't have 12 people. It's just Brian Doerksen and Paul Baloche, and I'm sure there's many others but those are a few that many of us recognize and love these stories.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I'm so grateful. Like I'm so grateful to the Lord that I got to
Mm-hmm.
bump into Baloche. The first time we met, he came out to Cape Town. So he was like one of the first people, beyond Alex Acuna and Ron Canoli and Abe Laboriel and Marty Nystrom. He was one of the first people ready to get on a plane and make the 20-hour, flights to get there. And he was teaching worship at a YWAM school in my town. And
Hmm.
I went along, and I love what you said. He's a friend to many.
Yeah,
He's
he
maybe
is.
the friendliest human in the world.
I know.
I
Yeah.
call I call him the mayor. It's impossible to walk across a crowded room without stopping at least 13 or 14 times. People thrusting babies into his arms. He's 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 just
Yeah.
so well loved, man. He's
He
such a
is.
good man. Yeah. So he kind of just he's 10 years older than me, and he kind of just took me under his wing because he could see. So uh, by the time I met Paul, I'd been doing it for like maybe 3 or 4 years, and then I thought, man, I would love to write songs, and do this somehow. If there was a way to do this, I would love to do this. And I
Hmm.
remember there was at the time there was a Christian artist called Susan Ashton who had made it
Mm.
across to South Africa, and she had a writer or a writer producer guy called Wayne Kirkpatrick, I think that's his
Yeah.
name. And I remember thinking, man, this guy's so good. He's crushing it. How do I get to be like Wayne? That's what I remember asking Paul something like that. And he just before he left on like the back of a hotel pad, he wrote down like, life is a journey to be lived, not a race to be won. Take your time, enjoy the process, enjoy the journey. Work on your craft. Let God work on your heart. These words have stayed with me for the last 30 years, and I think my mom still has that note from the hotel. Um,
Wow.
and and he stayed in touch, and he encouraged me all the way along. And once after I got married, Jude and I went across to Texas to say hi. We were just visiting friends in the U.S., and we spent a couple nights with Paul and Rita. And one of the nights we were just fooling around with guitar lines and talking about music that we loved, and we just started praises rising. It
Hmm.
was super slow. It was we were listening to Rufus Wainwright at the time. Eyes are turning to you, real slow. We turn to you, but we had in our minds at that point just like, imagine what it would have been like just in Jerusalem that day when Jesus like makes his entrance slowly into Jerusalem, and this like everybody's like, hey, the king is coming. Like the king is we have a king for us, who will fight for us and represent us. And hope is stirring, hearts are
Hmm.
yearning for you. Like people like, could this be the king that we've longed for? Could this be the
Hmm.
Messiah that we've prayed for, like Simeon? and yearn for. We turn to you because it's like both of us worship leaders in a small church. I love starting. I still like it. People don't do it anymore now. It's the age of the countdown. But I always like just starting worship while people were talking, and they can make a choice whether they want to, join in and sing or not. I always like because that's for me. That's the Jesus style.
Yeah.
I don't think like he's the least like Showtime guy in the book. Like the whole time, his whole ministry is constantly deflecting attention, and then on the one occasion when he is making his entrance and he's like acknowledged as the king, he shows up on a donkey. Like that's how little he values big time show business. Man, he's like, you want to be great, be like this child. He's a revolutionary to me. He still blows my mind the way he does things. So anyway, that's like a rabbit track, but we just thought, man, in church, people having coffee, talking, connecting, and then hearts are turning to you, we turn to you. And when we see you, we find strength to face the day. And like me, like, man, I need strength to face the day, and I'm gonna join in here and have a look. I'm gonna peer over the heads of the people and see who's coming. In your presence, all our fears are washed away. Hosanna. Yeah, and I love that word. I love that word, Hosanna. It's such a good worship word because it started out meaning help me. It started out meaning save me, and then because God is so faithful, the word actually started to mean praise you, because he'd saved people so many times after they cried out Hosanna that people equated calling on the name of the Lord as worship, which it is. So there it is.
Yeah.
So that's obviously fresh in our minds on this Holy Week, but that was how it started. Yeah.
And Chad, I'm reminded again, it feels like how important these stories are, and even just this whole project that you've invested yourself into. It's like we need to tell these modern worship leaders these stories of, what it was like when it wasn't the age of the countdown. Like you just said, I just was like, oh yeah, we kind of are in the age of the countdown, and we've forgotten what it's like to just, I don't know, we're in the age of the countdown. We're in the age of like song order. It's got to be like start with an opener, big hit, and we need big, we have all these rules and like ideas of what worship is supposed to be. And Brenton, you're just like breaking them all right now. You're just like laying them all flat. So thanks for that. But that's what these stories are kind of doing. Hey, yeah, it's good. How's that feel, Chad?
Yeah, absolutely. As I've often said, one of the things that makes the '90s special is it really was the end of what I would classify as the analog era. And not only with technology, but just I think with approach. It's just things got a lot more complicated once we kind of cross Y2K and beyond. As far as anything that has to do with worship ministry. So, and even too, I mean, a lot of the stories from the '90s or earlier, have kind of been lost to the ethers of time because, they, did come out, in magazines or newspapers and whatnot, never got archived. So the fact that we're able to now, kind of go back and, reshine a light on some of those narratives, is really, really exciting.
Really good. Well, Brenton, thank you. Thanks for your stories, for your candid honesty, for your odd-looking glasses, and your little farm that you're on with pigs and a rooster. You kind of you sort of break a lot of stereotypes that I had about what it meant to be like this awesome, modern worship leader, and you're just a normal guy as far as I'm concerned. So.
You haven't even talked to my parents yet, man.
I know.
You really know what a normal guy is. Yeah.
Seriously, I'd be nervous too. But I feel inspired myself. I almost feel like this is a little bit of like a cleansing the palate. I can let some of these rules or ideas kind of go a little bit, get back to that original heart, the rawness, the days for me when it was just me and an acoustic guitar singing these old songs, and no internet, no cell phones, barely had microphones in those days for me, and then these songs found their way along. So here we are 25, 30, 35 years later, but still it's something attractive about that era, and you certainly bring that back, Brenton. So thank you.
Thank you,
Yep.
Ryan. Yeah, I thank both of you. Thank you, Chad, just for pursuing the Father's heart on this and chasing down these stories. And Ryan, thank you for your years of service to the worship community. I love that you care. It's a precious thing, and we're grateful for you. So thank you.
Right on. All right. Well, this is Ryan Dahl, Chad Gentry. What were you going to say there, Chad?
I was going to say before we close out, I know you prepared, Ryan, a few slides just of some of Brenton's materials on there.
I would love to show that, actually. I wonder if Brenton even realizes that you are on the home page.
That is the 90s Worship Night
90s
website.
Worship Night. There we go.
That wasn't what I was referring to, but I appreciate
well, I always got to start with someone else. But then there is praise charts as well. And there we go. Yes. We've got Refiner's Fire here. I mean, I worked on these chord charts myself, Brenton, because I still love just listening to the song. And I loved this arrangement. I felt like all these arrangements, Chad, I feel like, that was the way I always wished it was written. And I mean, Brian did a great job when he did it 30 years ago. But you did a great work to it, for sure.
Well done,
when you
Chad.
have timeless songs to work with, it makes it a lot easier,
Yeah,
and,
totally.
It's great too. And then, what Jeff, did with, All Who Are Thirsty, just really, really fun, and just so excited to honor that song. And definitely, I would encourage, I know Ryan, Brenton, we're going to do a top 5 of, Ryan and I's favorite of your songs. But just as we have a second here, I would encourage all of our listeners to check out all of Brenton's projects through the years. Probably my favorite Brenton Brown album was Everlasting God. It had Everlasting God on there, and also another great song. Obviously, folks will be watching this after Holy Week, but a song called "Jesus, You Are Worthy." Fantastic song, and definitely fits with our Holy Week theme as well.
So great, man. Brenton, you can see me just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling down through the ages of you. That top, those are all songs you were singing on, but then, your songwriting. We didn't even talk about Lion and the Lamb, which, is a song I don't even think half the people don't realize you wrote it, because it was, Big Daddy Weave, and then Bethel Church, and Leland took it, Sailing, and Everlasting God. Oh my goodness, how many times I've played that song, and
that's my favorite.
So many great stories. So congratulations for a life well lived, but definitely stay you, Brenton. Don't become like normal, and stay on the edge. Makes you very interesting to talk to, that's for sure.
Thank you, Ryan. Don't stop praying for me. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sometime I'll talk to your parents, so we'll find out the real story on the Brenton Brown. So, all right. This is Ryan Dahl, Chad Gentry, 90s Worship Night, praise charts. Get all the music in different places. And thank you, Brenton. This has been a good one. We'll talk to you all later.